But first, let's talk about Kemi Badenoch, the new Tory leader. She's named her shadow cabinet, and I suppose the question is, could you? There are people in it that I've vaguely heard of, let alone people who don't take much interest in politics. I think to call this shadow cabinet lightweight is to make the understatement of the century. I mean, can the Tories really stage a comeback with this lot? I'm not convinced. Let's talk to the Bow Group's chair, Ben Harris-Quinney. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Thanks, Kevin.
Have you been an admirer, a big fan of Ed Argar's career?
No, not particularly, no. But many of the figures that I think have come into this shadow cabinet, the problem isn't just that they're relative unknowns. The problem is that most of them have their cards marked as being very much in line with what the previous Conservative government that everyone, Conservatives and leftists alike, wanted rid of. And that's what I'm seeing in it. I'm seeing no reflection of change, quite apart from the fact we might have to search our minds to work out who a lot of the people are.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to Kemi, she only had 121 MPs to choose for, an almost record low for the Tories. And a lot of big beasts ruled themselves out. James Cleverly, of course, a rival in the leadership race. Steve Barclay, Tom Tugendhat, all said no, don't want to know. Andrew Mitchell as well. Jeremy Hunt also doesn't want to know. So it didn't leave her with much. But I'm just thinking, that's given. I mean, Mel Stride, Shadow Chancellor. I mean, you know, he's a lovely man and all that, but meek and mild. Ed Argar, as I just said, I'll be honest with you, I've barely heard of him. He's the Health Secretary, or Shadow Health Secretary. James Cartlidge. Who? He's Defence Secretary. And then we got this guy, Neil O'Brien, who's Shadow Education Secretary. I'm very worried about him. He was the COVID witchfinder general who kept a list of anybody he felt had not adhered to the COVID rules strictly, wanted them put in prison. He was a complete fascist about it. And he campaigned to keep schools shut and so on and so forth. So I don't like the cut of his jib at all. But generally speaking, and Priti Patel is back as Shadow Foreign Secretary. I'm sorry, you know, I've never joined the fan club of Priti Patel because, you know, here was the Home Secretary who said she was going to solve the migrant crisis and never did. In fact, she presided over an escalating shambles. So generally, she just seems to me to be a blast from the past who perhaps shouldn't come back. And then you've got, you know, a few kind of bland non-entities. And then you've got people we haven't even heard of. And then the extremely dubious Neil O'Brien. I think, Ben, that this is a dangerously weak lineup, and to try to sort of refloat the sunken Tory ship with this lot, good luck with that, Kemi.
Well, unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember when David Cameron became leader of the Tories and promised everything under the sun. He pitched himself not as an heir to Blair publicly, but, you know, as someone who was going to bring immigration down to the tens of thousands. He said Britain was societally broken. He said multiculturalism had failed. And of course, when he got into government, he governed to the left of Blair. And I think that's what most people's concern is with the Conservative Party, that Kemi Badenoch has talked a good game, but she's been in government before and not delivered a good game. And when you look at figures like Mel Stride, who, you know, is fairly well liked on the parliamentary backbenches, but he was formerly the person who was running Michael Gove's campaign in Parliament when he was running for leader, very much an establishment figure of the Tory party. And I think what people want to see is a rejection of that establishment and an embracing of what went wrong in the last government, not an appointment of figures who were heavily involved and didn't decry it. And I think when you look at Jenrick is someone who really set out his stall about wanting to tackle immigration. So surely he should have been in at the Home Office as someone to focus on that issue rather than justice, where he's sidelined and he can't talk about immigration in the way that he has been. So there's no signs there that tell me this is a Conservative Party that's learnt its lesson. And I don't think those signs are going to be there for the public. What the Conservative Party needs to do is an urgent reform agenda, clear out Conservative central office, put the members back in charge of candidate selection, and then maybe by the next election we can have a renewal and have some new figures and faces that have new ideas that people are excited about. But at the moment, yeah, it just looks like a rehash of an old failure.
I think you just sort of articulated exactly what I'm trying to get at, not as articulately as you, obviously. This is it, isn't it? You know, why did the Tories lose the last election? Because Tory supporters were exasperated with them. As you quite rightly say, Ben, David Cameron got the ball rolling. And from then on, Tory politicians, Tory governments felt, oh, if we're not careful, Labour will steal all the popularity with their left-wing policies. So we better be a bit left-wing then. We better be about
quite a lot.
You know,
quite a lot left-wing.
Yeah, exactly. So they turned themselves into Labour light. They got more and more woke. They allowed the woke revolution to happen without even noticing, almost asleep at the wheel. Now, what the woke revolution sort of did was to turn the country left, even though we had ostensibly a right-wing Tory government, except, as you say, they weren't right-wing. Then along came, you know, I mean, the only reason Theresa May ever was a Tory was because she's from the Shires and she thinks that's respectable. She's a Lib Dem if ever I saw one, possibly Labour even. Then you have Boris Johnson, who was just this green fanatic. That's not Tory. That's not Tory. And then
and he talked a good game on some things, but he didn't deliver.
Exactly right. So what we've got, the last election, you know, what propelled Labour into power were disaffected Tories who just despaired of these, you know, these prime ministers and these governments that we kept getting that weren't Conservative. So Kemi Badenoch, to my mind, although she sort of sometimes seems to talk the right kind of game, I'm not sure she's quite appreciated what the problem is with the Tory party right now. As Suella Braverman said, and Liz Truss, you know, that she's not, or this government, or rather, Kemi Badenoch, perhaps is not quite confronting the essential problem with the Tories, and that is that over 14 years, and it looks as if it's still the case, they've forgotten how to be Conservatives.
Yeah, and also talk is cheap. We've heard all the talk over 14 years plus about what they were going to do, how they were going to cut immigration, how they were going to cut taxes. What we want to see is action. So we can see that action from Kemi Badenoch, both in terms of the team she appoints, so we haven't seen it with that, and in terms of what she does with the Conservative Party. Does she give it back to the members? Does she stop these men in grey suits behind the scenes, stopping genuine Conservatives coming through? Or does she keep things more or less the same and just rely on Labour being terrible and continue in this system we've got in Britain, where one of the greatest countries on earth, but when it comes to deciding who to run it, we've got two bad options and the public are forced to go for the least worst? I think we're better than that. People like Nigel Farage think we're better than that. And that's the direction I think we need to move in, where people can actually be passionate about the choice. And I do think, in terms of where the Conservative Party is at the moment, they need to be pragmatic about working with Farage. They need to be pragmatic about working with Reform, because most people on the right, most small C Conservative voters, don't see this great enmity between Reform and Conservatives. They don't want Labour in. The vast majority of people didn't vote for Labour. They got in by default because people stayed at home or split their vote between Conservatives and Reform. But we need to get them out because they're taking the country further in the wrong direction. And I think Conservatives and Reform need to wake up to what the voters want, which is them to work together and to move further towards a positive articulation of conservatism and sorting out immigration the tax burden and all these big issues that have been rumbling for a long time, not because they feel they have to, because the voters are going to punish them if they don't, but because they actually want to. That's what we want to see, people that are passionate about solving these issues.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to do this story, because I noticed that since Kemi announced her cabinet, shadow cabinet, it was only yesterday, wasn't it? Apparently there's been a big surge in Reform UK membership. So people are gravitating towards reform. And I suppose what I'm getting at, Ben, is this. I'm just wondering if Kemi Badenoch, so far, she's been like the rest of them. Oh, we'll destroy Nigel Farage. No deals. You know, we are the Tories. Well, I think if they carry on like this, they might be the last Tories. I really do think that the Tory project is in big trouble because we have too many Conservative politicians who are terrified to be right-wing. They're terrified to be like... the Tory party used to be like Reform UK. It has forgotten how to do that. And I wonder whether or not more and more people who used to vote Tory will now go, you know what, I've had enough of this lot. I'm off to Reform UK.
Well, you can see those membership numbers in terms of how many people voted. When Cameron took over leadership of the Conservatives, there were around 400,000 Conservative members. Now there's a little over 100,000 in terms of those that are actually participating, get involved and voting. And as you rightly say, it won't be long before Reform are at that figure or perhaps even surpassing it. And there's got to be a recognition that Nigel Farage is probably the greatest communicator on the right in British politics that there's been for a long time. And even if you've got someone like Jenrick, who's sort of saying some of similar things, he can't compete with Farage in terms of his communication ability, in terms of his reach. And so these figures have got to come together if they want to do anything other than squabble from the sidelines. And it goes for Reform as well, by the way, because, you know, a deal needs to be done on both sides. But I think we've all got to be pragmatic that without that deal, Labour are going to be in by default.
Yeah, and what worries me is that Kemi is a traditional politician and they hate doing unions, they hate doing deals, and they'll say, no, we're the Tories, and they won't do that deal. I mean, Jenrick kind of bordered on it, but she does not. If I was the leader of the Tory party, by the way, that's unlikely to happen, but if I was, right now, if I was the new leader, I would stand up right now and say, if you vote for us at the next election, I guarantee I will solve the migrant crisis. I will turn the bloody boats round, or I will create detention centres, and as soon as these migrants arrive, they will be deported. They will not be allowed to stay because they have broken our laws, the system that they use very successfully in Australia, and/or I'll just turn the boats round, and to hell with Macron, to hell with France. You know, what Kemi Badenoch says, oh, well, it's very difficult, you know, the European Convention on Human Rights, it's difficult to leave because of the 1998 Equalities Act.
Yeah,
and you know, and I say, why not just, you know, never mind that act, never mind the Equalities Act, turn the damn boats round and deport people. Otherwise, you're not going to win the next election, Kemi.
No, and you know, even David Cameron put a figure on it. Kemi has said, "Oh, I don't want to put a figure on what I want to reduce immigration figures to," and that, you know, that should be a warning sign.
Suicide, Ben. That is suicide.
Yeah. Right. So they've got to wake up, I think, to this reality, and you know, it's a question of how many elections they want to lose before they wake up to it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. Hopefully, Kemi will adapt as we progress through this Parliament. She's certainly going to have some good material to attack Labour with, because they're useless. But I doubt her resolve, to be honest with you. I think she's part of the blob, and I think we've got a shadow cabinet here that are also part of the Westminster blob, terrified to disturb the universe, you know, status quo, don't do anything too dramatic. What any politician in Westminster right now, I was saying this to Rod Little earlier, who realises that doing something dramatic about the migrant crisis would make them popular, would be extremely acceptable, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, the rules, I think, have completely changed. And this idea of softly, don't rock the boat, keep the Blairite consensus, We need the opposite of that. We need, people are tired of that politics, which is why Starmer's popularity rating has dropped by record levels. You know, people said, oh, he's won the biggest majority in living memory. This is unbelievable. He's incredibly popular. Now he's absolutely in the gutter. Why? Because people have no more patience left for this establishment that has been in power for the last 30 years and is failing the country. So we need new voices. We need radical thinking. And I think that will do them huge favours rather than set them back. But you need to be able to draw new people into the party as well. And that's why you need a system where you open it up so you can have a democratic vote on who the candidates are going to be, rather than the restricted system and all the same old people pulling the strings behind the scenes. You're never going to get new thinking like that, and if they don't, as you say, they'll die off.
Yeah, and this just last point really. You know, now that they've finally got a leader and they've got a shadow cabinet, weak though it obviously is, let's hope that the Tories remember that they're called His Majesty's opposition. So maybe just now they can start opposing. That their lack of action since July is a national scandal. It really is. We've watched this Labour government, the worst government I've ever seen, the worst first 100 days this country has ever seen, and from the Tories, barely a word. Absolute disgrace, and for that alone, they deserve to die, if you ask me. But I do wish them the best, but I'm not optimistic.
Well, it's pull your socks up time, I think. But, you know, we're having to do that job. People in the media, people that are commentators are having to hold the government to account, because for not just now, but for the last 14, 15 years, the Tories have been absent.
Absolutely. Ben, great to talk to you. Come on again soon. That's Ben Harris-Quinney, chair of the Bow Group. What do you reckon? I mean, isn't it about time the Tory party started being conservative? All the noises from Kemi, I don't think are that great. Oh, we're going to be careful with the European Convention on Human Rights. No, I've got a better idea. Leave! Just leave, do something, dare to disturb the universe. Honestly, I'm so sick of all this bland nonsense and their failure to realise that if they just were a bit more dramatic, if they were a bit more resolute, people would like it. You know, if Kemi stood up and said, trust me, you vote for me, I'll turn the damn boats around. That's a promise. It would win votes, but she won't do it because, you know, that's not serious politics. Well, it's the politics that we want, thank you very much.